Thank you, Jordan.
That's
I'm really happy to be here. We're all happy to be here. I just want to quickly introduce myself. I am a success coach and I work with graduate students working in a business program. In the past, I have worked with undergraduate online students. So all the students I work with are online. Dominique?
My name is Dominique Williams. I am a student success coach. I work with graduate MSW students. I am also a faculty member. I teach undergraduate and graduate students, both in the online classroom and the traditional classroom format.
Hello and welcome. My name is Ashonda Thomas, and I'm a success coach as well. I work with graduate students working in an evaluation program and an information system technology program. However, I've worked with all students across the board, so I didn't think there's a level of student that I have not worked with yet. Thank you.
So we came up with the idea for this seminar, this webinar. Basically, if you can imagine yourself standing around the water cooler with colleagues and talking about things that students are saying. So we compared notes, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. And there was a common theme, and that is that, especially in the online environment, we wanted to have feedback about the humanized learning environment and supporting students and what we're hearing from students. So the three of us are really just going to be having a casual conversation. And when it came down to it, we thought we needed to know first from you where you're coming from so that we can sort of talk to the experiences you're having with students. And I'm going to ask you to go ahead and go into the Padlet and answer the questions that are in there, and then we'll address those a little bit later. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. I think they're already covering our webinar. They're doing everything that we're going to talk about. So that's good. We'll be reinforcing everything. So you can continue to participate in that and we'll see the answers. But really, when we were discussing student needs and what student learning needs are, it came down to the fact that as a faculty member, there's so much diversity. How do you manage that? And what are some things you can do to manage that in the classroom? And we came up with these categories, and that's really what we're going to be doing, is going through these different categories and offering some best practices and having conversations about what we're hearing from students. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go to the first topic, and the three of us are going to have that conversation that I was talking about. So Dominique and Ashonda, as far as getting to know your students, we talked earlier about how much students really want meaningful relationships with faculty. What are some ways that faculty can successfully get to know their students?
From my observations, what I found that has been really useful is the personable approach. They really look up to faculty members, no matter what level of a student that they are. They really look up to their knowledge and want to really be able to connect with them on a personal level. So when faculty members are presenting themselves as such, I noticed that students tend to express that they have more of a connection with that particular faculty member. So that's one of the aspects that I find to be extremely valuable.
Connection is definitely important. As a faculty member myself, when I meet with my students, I ask them who they are, what they do, their background, and I try to connect to them in some way. So some of my students are teachers, some of my students are parents. I can connect with parents very easily. Some of my students are, I have a multi-generational level of students. So some of them are straight out of high school, others are coming back into the school from being in the workforce. So just connecting with them and letting them know that we are all human and they don't have to be something that they're not. They don't have to feel like the faculty member is higher or above them in any sort, that I can relate to them as well. And just really kind of getting to know who they are as an individual versus who they are as a student. So individual first, student second.
Okay, and I should mention that we did talk to the big power team of success coaches. So these are our ideas, but at the same time, I may interject some ideas we received from other coaches. And one of the suggestions that coaches had, and this is what they're doing in the programs that they're working with, is having like an orientation session, or what would be like a module 0. It's a pre-course session where it's more of a getting to know each other, get to know my expectations as a faculty member. And it kind of sets a tone, like you were saying, Ashunda, it's personable. It just makes that connection early on rather than diving right into the class. So that was a suggestion. I think, like you said, Dominique, ask questions of the students, ask some questions and ask them to share. Okay. So what do you hear from students about how their faculty are getting to know them? Have you heard some other best practices?
I have faculty members in our program that do host sessions. So once a week, they'll host a session where students can drop in and they can talk to the faculty member about topics in the class or about the career field that they're in, because my students are social work students. So the career field that they're in, and just get to know the faculty member that way. And it doesn't necessarily have to be formal. It can just be, what's your story as a faculty member? How did you become a faculty member? Did you work in the field before, or did you graduate and immediately start teaching? So just getting a well-rounded idea of who the faculty member is, and then the student can then feel a lot more comfortable with expressing who they are and what they're looking for. And we also do faculty dine-in sessions where we host noon dine-in sessions with faculty members and evening dine-in sessions, so students can decide if they are available during the lunch hour or available during the evening dinner hour. And the same thing, they can come in and it's just an open forum for them to learn about the program that they're in and about the career and the field wise. And, just getting out of the idea that I have to sit down, have a conversation with you about who are you? Where are you from? How many children do you have? So getting out of the normalcy of meeting someone for the first time and just mainly like, let's just have a conversation. Let's coffee and conversation or faculty dine things and really get to know each other in an impersonable way. And it doesn't have to seem so rigid and stressful and intimidating.
For sure. To add to that, one of the programs that I support, they have community meetings. And it's one of my favorites that they have is when they come together collectively in regards to the program. And they sit, and it's really casual, but it's really about professional aspects, career opportunities, like where they're located, what the industry is like. It's almost like an informational interview, but in a group setting where everyone is sharing what their needs are in regards to their career and what like the degree program like means to them. And in return, the faculty members that are participating in that is sharing a broad amount of information, but in a really casual and small setting.
And both of those examples that you both gave, to me, it makes it sound like it's doable. If you have a class of 50 students, I mean, sometimes we're talking about getting to know them one-on-one. Maybe that's not feasible, but these kind of group things that you're talking about, I think maybe that makes it more manageable. Okay, we're going to move on to maintain consistent communication. So another way to manage the diversity of needs of students is to maintain consistent communication. It's important that the lines of communication between faculty and students are consistent and open. what best practices have you seen faculty use in communicating with their students? And then I have a second part to that, but I'd like to ask you, what have you seen faculty doing that really works with consistent communication?
I feel like what I'm most impressed with as a coach, of course, is that both sides of the fence utilize me as the medium in regards to communication, where communication is getting lost or is lost at this point. Both parties know to interject on my services as the coach to understand how to communicate more efficiently and effectively. And I think that's really essential because that's the retention space, right? And for both parties to understand that there's a common denominator where things are going to be, progressed in a more productive way. I like that they both know to utilize me in a way. So it's really great to know that they understand the success coach as that ultimate resource for communication when it's feel like it's being lost.
I know yesterday you said you're like a bridge, and I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really
Yeah,
are. Or
it does feel
and
like
in the
that.
title we say, ambassadors. So that's really what this is about today is
Yeah.
trying to connect what students are saying with faculty and course designers. What else, Dominique? What else have you seen faculty or even yourself? What have you done to be consistent and open in your communication?
So I like to outline to my students the ways that I prefer communication because that's important. I want students to understand that I teach, but I also do other things amongst teaching, like I'm a student support coach. And so in order for us to be able to have a positive relationship and a relationship where we are able to connect, we need to both respect, time, each other's time. And I'm not always free and flexible, 100% of the time, and neither is the student. So I always tell my students that email or sending, I teach out of Canvas, so sending an email in Canvas, my emails in Canvas go to my email inbox. And I tell students, if you don't hear from me and it's a pressing question, I open the form for students to send me a text message, but I also let them know that just because you send me a text message does not mean that I'm going to be immediately responsive. I'll probably be a little bit more responsive or a little bit faster in my response time than an email. But just setting that expectation for them that, hey, try to email me first. And I will always, be honest with you and let you know, like, hey, I'm unavailable during these hours, but just setting that expectation for students. I also allow students to give me a phone call because I think sometimes going back and forth via email or text message can be very time consuming when I can just talk to a student and say, hey, what do you need? And it just goes by a little bit faster and the information is retained a lot better as well. So it kind of just depends on what works best for the student and what works best for me during that week. But I open all lines of communication because I want students to understand that I'm flexible and I'm not, just totally off guard and off limits to you, but also understand that the flexibility and the ways of communication may vary week to week, just depending on, what's going on, just as same for the student.
That's great to acknowledge that up front. And I think that makes them as students feel more comfortable in communicating. What are some other ways that a coach can encourage, or even a faculty member, but as coaches, how do we encourage students to be proactive with their communication? A faculty member may be the most open and consistent communicator, but it's a two-way street. So what are some ways you encourage students?
That definitely is. I just always make sure that they understand that they must show up. It's in regards to what they're trying to attain for themselves. And you're in a community where everyone is here to support you to reach that goal. So our common interest is your success. But in order for you to attain that success, you have to be engaged, you have to be proactive, and you just have to show up for yourself. And in turn, you have to utilize your teacher assistant as well, utilize other resources that the school has available to you, in addition to, the faculty hours that are being offered to you and those different streams of communications that Dominique referenced to.
And there's oh, sorry, go ahead, Dominique.
Oh, I saw the question. I was going to address how do students prefer to communicate the different ways. I always tell students to make that known upfront to their instructors, because I think students that I've worked with in the past are very nervous or scared to address their professors. So I tell students they're human, just like you are. Hey, we are people. We, go through the same things that you go through. So we're not off limits to being accessible to you. We want to be accessible to you, but it has to be in ways that work for us both. So a lot of my students would prefer email because they want to be able to go back to the email when they are, doing their assignments or when they're working on the aspects of the class that they had questions about. They love to be able to go back to that email and say, oh, this is what she said in the email. But I also have other students that are a little bit more nervous when it comes to email. So they prefer a phone conversation so that they can get the tone and the mood of the instructor. And that's fine as well. But I tell students, unless you show up, the instructor can't show up for you. You have to show up for you, and then the instructor knows how to show up for you. So it's very important that students also understand that they have a role and a responsibility first to allow their instructor to understand who they are and what they need, because I can't help you if I don't know what you need. And so it's very important that students, address that with their instructors. I tell my students up front, when I'm working with them as a coach, these are the struggles that you have. Be available and open to let your instructor know, I struggle with writing, so that you can ask your instructor, what are ways or tips or tools that you think I could use in your classroom to become a better writer? It's very important that we as students, we express our insecurities and our weaknesses so that we can be helped by our faculty members. No one is perfect. So we know that you're in this program. We don't expect for you to know everything. If you did, you wouldn't need to be in the program. So help us help you by letting us know what you need. But I think a lot of students like email, and a lot of, other students, I think the faculty open forum session has worked because they get to hear from other students their struggles, and then they feel a lot more normal. Oh, my peers are also struggling, and they're okay with expressing that to the faculty member. So now I feel a lot more comfortable being human too.
Yeah,
Thanks,
to add to that, I can add like something that I feel is important in regards to what they prefer in regards to communication. Keep in mind, especially if you have just different generations in your course, like the younger generation might prefer text. We typically do. And, the more seasoned students may very well prefer a phone call or even Zoom, because I don't want to belittle the text aspect. We know a lot of communications get lost via text, but it does depend on the generation interest, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Before I move on to the next category, I wanted to interject another coach's suggestion was a faculty member who does like pulse checks throughout the semester or the term to see either how an individual student is doing, or even as a class, just a way of saying, how is everyone doing, or where are we with this, just kind of checking on how everybody's doing. And that all depends on how often you meet synchronously and not, but somehow, building that in as looking for ways to check in with students. Okay, how about acknowledging and respecting every student? In order to acknowledge and respect every student, you need to get to know them, and we've already talked about that. What are some student characteristics and demographics that might prevent them from feeling acknowledged in the classroom? For instance, I work with a lot of military students, and they may not be overtly, obviously a active military student to the professors. So I really, when I meet them for the first time, encourage them, please get to know your instructor and let them know your travel obligations or any of your active duty obligations, and talk with them and see how they feel about your travel. So that's a suggestion that I have had with students? What are some things, what are some characteristics, student characteristics or demographics that might make them feel not acknowledged in the classroom?
Definitely the multi-generational aspect is a struggle for a lot of students. Like a few of my older students struggle with feeling like they are behind the curve because they're students in their class, classes that are 20 years younger than them. And they feel like that they're behind getting started with their MSW degree, or they feel that they have been in the career field so long that they don't know if their peers understand some of the curriculum that's in the classroom, not text-wise, but in relation to actually being an expert in the field. So the multi-generational aspect can be a struggle for students. Technology-wise, I get students that struggle a lot. I haven't, when I went to school 25, 30 years ago, we didn't have computers. We submitted, papers that were, hey, here's my assignment, hand to hand, not, submitting through Turnitin or electronically. There wasn't an electronic outlet for students to submit their papers. And, professors graded with red ink pens. And so students were able to see feedback in, real time and actual physical, paper, which makes a difference. When I went to school, we were still using, papers. And a lot of students struggle with online textbooks. I have students that are like, online textbooks, I wear glasses, I can't see, I have to get my readers. So just really being understanding to not every student is, the traditional, I graduated from high school and I'm 18 to 23 going to undergrad, or I graduated from undergrad and I'm 23 to, 30 going to grad school. So just really being aware of that and trying to make the most out of it. And I always have to be very candid with my students. I struggle with technology as well. And there are some times that I forget when I do my classroom, I forget that I need to turn on the Turnitin. So I had a student this week. I'm trying to submit my assignment, but it says that the professor hasn't set it up. It's because I forgot to click the OK for Turnitin for students to submit their papers through Turnitin. I just let students know, I am struggling with this technology. Canvas updates frequently. And I just give them the green light to understand, like, hey, you're not the only person struggling with technology. Every time it changes, I am, kind of going crazy too. So just, being very open, but that multi-generational is a struggle for students.
Yeah, for sure about that. International students. I do have several international students and they do have struggles, especially when it comes to, I know that they commit to these online like live sessions that they have for their classes. But then in regards to like group assignments, really being able to connect with their peers, if it's a university that has international students, we just have to be in that mindset of that flexibility when it comes to time zones. So that can be really difficult to adjust, especially when things are already underway. So you want to make sure that they are accounted for in that aspect when it's in regards to, maybe when the students meet with one another, they're scheduled to meet with one another, maybe not putting them in a group where the time zones are just completely way off from each other, just really being mindful of that.
And Cheryl, another aspect too is language barriers as well. Like there are students that are, English is their second language. So connecting, as coaches, we connect students to the resources on campus. So when I meet with a student prior to them starting their program, we always discuss what are your strengths and weaknesses? What do you think you're going to need help with in this program? And I have students that English is their second language. So connecting them to the writing advisor, firsthand so that they can start talking through some of those things before the program starts and before they submit their first assignment and maybe don't get the grade that they anticipated they would receive. And just really giving them the resources that they need beforehand so that when they're actually starting to do their writing or their assignments, they can go back to those resources for help. Because not every student, like Oshana talked about international students, not every student English was their first language. So we still have the same expectation for, students, but we want to at least be able to give them the resources that can help them be able to stay academically up to par with what's needed in the program.
This is a simple demographic, but something we really haven't talked about is some students are taking classes full time, but some of them are part-time, maybe only taking one class, and they're a working professional and they have a family. So something as simple as giving advance notice and a lot of time and space for large projects or large assignments is showing respect to the rest of their life and the balance that they're trying to create. Changes in the assignments and due dates with only a few days notice might be okay for the full-time student, but for the working professional, maybe they're using the weekend or the evenings and that doesn't work for them. So just, being aware of maybe the kinds of things they have going on in their life besides classes is helpful. And, what you mentioned, Dominique, we talked too about how there could be adjunct faculty who aren't really familiar. Maybe they don't have a coach, and we think they should, of course, but they don't have a coach and they're new. Finding someone who on campus, like a touch point or a point person who would be able to connect them or connect students with the resources that you're talking about. It shouldn't be expected of a faculty member to make all of those referrals or all those connections, but hopefully the faculty have the support so that they can have someone else direct them to help the student. Okay, we're going to move on to practicing cultural sensitivity. And obviously there's a lot of overlap in this, but do you have suggestions or examples of way faculty can practice and demonstrate cultural sensitivity? For instance, in the program I support, there's a lot of, there's international students living in other countries, and the students, the faculty embrace that by actually using their professional experiences as a way to learn in the classroom for comparative and contrasting business practices. So I think that's showing sensitivity and also embracing the diversity in the classroom. So that was something I had to offer. What are some other ways that faculty can embrace and demonstrate cultural sensitivity?
I feel like being very mindful of current events that negatively impact students, and it can impact them in different ways, mentally, psychologically, physically, emotionally, all of those things come into play. And we might not necessarily see them immediately, right? But just showing some sort of presence or acknowledgement that you realize these things, understand how it can be impactful, and just kind of have I like to use this term, an open door policy to be receptive of a student needing to, have support in that emotional space because of X, Y, and Z current events that are happening that tends to never stop happening. It's always something, right? Just kind of staying abreast of these things and acknowledging that extra support may be needed. And this is where you can actually tie in, the school resources that are readily available to students and being fully aware of what those different resources are. I think that's a key thing, especially in this day and age where there's constantly something happening, one thing after the next.
I agree. And being able to just stop and address the moment and address the feelings that students may be having in this moment. Yes, we do have to press forward and, learn and continue the lesson plan, but addressing that there are things happening and I know that it may be impacting your mood and how you feel. And I want to be sensitive to that. So if anyone, having an open floor, if anyone wants to just say something and get something off of their chest, I always ask my students when we have class, how is everybody doing? How are you doing this week? Tell me something good that's happened. Tell me something that's not so good that's happened. And I also tell them, for me too, hey, I've had a great week, or it's been a really rough week for me. This is why it's been a really rough week for me. And I'm also aware of my own cultural bias. As people, we have our own cultural biases. So making sure that we're not projecting those onto students, and that they feel like it's an open door policy, and they don't feel like, oh my goodness, my instructor is this way, so I can't say anything against that because they're going to look at me a certain way, or they're going to fail me, or they're not going to like me as a student. So I'm very cautious of the things that I say. I teach a politics class. It's one of the classes that I teach, and it can be a very sticky subject. So just being aware of, what I say can impact a student's desire to even want to participate in the class. So I think it's very important that in regards to sensitivity, that we just start with ourselves. And then also I tell my students all the time, hey, this is going to be a sticky class, a sticky subject. Feel free to respectfully, debate or respectfully discuss your viewpoints, but make sure that you're not putting down the viewpoints of other people, because our perceptions are based on our experiences, and no one's walked in another person's shoes. So we have to remind ourselves of that so that we can all be able to respectfully have an open forum classroom.
One of the other suggestions I thought was a great suggestion from a coach that's working with a faculty member who put something in their syllabus acknowledging that there might be cultural or religious holidays that might conflict maybe with an assignment or something in the syllabus. And just having that open statement there and inviting the student to approach them and talk about it and work through it, I thought was a really great way of practicing cultural sensitivity. Okay, trying to see if there's, another suggestion for, this kind of ties into what you were saying, Ashunda, just be aware of the resources. And again, if you want to put something in your syllabus about acknowledging and enforcing the university policy on hate speech and insensitive remarks, I think that's just a great way of showing your position and what is important and your values that you hold. So, okay. How about diversity in the lesson plan? We'll be incorporating diversity in the lesson plan. So diversity, we all know, can mean a lot of things, from diverse ages, we've talked about that, time zones, professional and educational backgrounds, academic preparation, just, that's basically what this is about, is knowing all the different pieces and parts, the moving pieces and parts of students. What are some ways a course syllabus and the assignments can be designed to incorporate all of this diversity? I'll start off. We mentioned time zones. Ashunda already talked about that. Just when you're scheduling deadlines, group assignments, quizzes, and exams, keep in mind the variety of time zones if you have that information available. What else can you think of?
I think those deadlines, I'm probably speaking from a student perspective as a student, but those deadlines, just considering like you don't have typically I don't know, I think traditional students should change at this point, but I feel like the deadlines can be really like harsh at times. And again, I'm being biased. I feel like I'm being biased, but I feel like considering the multi students that you have, right? You have all these different students. You don't have them fresh out of high school anymore. Maybe they're coming into the program for promotion and they're working full time, and they really only have the weekends to really be thoroughly engaged. So, those, I think it's the deadlines, and I feel like I'm speaking from a biased place, so I'm just going to pass the buck.
So I know with a lot of us as instructors, a lot of universities have resources and set up classrooms and have course materials that we're required as instructors to use, but having a variety of different teaching methods can help to bring in some diversity in the classroom. Allowing students to discuss their experiences and their perspectives can allow for a diversity perspective. Also, I think too, just incorporating present and past events. into the classroom, whatever topic that you're teaching, because again, with the multi-generational, some students have not lived through, flip phones, or never having text messaging, or never having to go to school without a cell phone. I had a teacher, not a teacher, a student one time tell me, when I was in high school and college, we did not have cell phones. There wasn't a way to communicate with your family unless you went to a payphone or unless you got home. Living in the 90s was a lot different than living in the 2000s and the 2020s. So just really allowing students to give their perspective and discuss different ways that things may be different, and also allowing, students to be able to express like how they best learn, and incorporating that into the classroom. I know Zoom is a big way that we use the classroom nowadays. There are also other platforms out there that we can use to make the classroom a lot more fun and innovative. Adding things like Kahoot in your class, so you're not just teaching from a PowerPoint. You're adding modalities where students feel like, oh, this is a little bit fun. Using breakout rooms, allowing, I have a session in my class a week where students actually teach the class. So I tell them, okay, this is the chapter that you're teaching on in your group, and they have to come up with a creative way to actually teach the class. And then we have dialogue about it in the classroom open forum. So just really being open to not just lecturing, and especially now if your class is on Zoom, not just sitting on Zoom with a PowerPoint lecturing your students, but making it a little bit more fun and creative so that they're actually engaged and involved. I have teaching a politics class. There's a rap that an artist did in regards to politics and when you should be voting and the different times that voting happens, because a lot of people don't know. And so I played that video, and it's perfect now because we just had a voting season. And so I play that video, and students that are artistic, they love it, and they remember now when they should be voting and who they should be voting for during certain times of the year. So it's just really incorporating different modalities and kind of engaging students and catching them for what their creative art is.
That sounds a lot of fun. We had a comment in the chat, and I actually think that's a great segue to the last topic, and that's giving students freedom and flexibility. That's also a great way to manage diversity in the classroom. And I've not heard of these, but Dorothy's suggesting OOPS tokens, which I love that idea. Basically, it sounds like you get so many free passes, or you get so many late assignments, something like that. So let's talk about freedom and flexibility. The last couple of years, I think, have been very challenging, as we can all agree, and flexibility has been key. I've had students that have had COVID, and I think it's kind of been universally agreed amongst the department, the faculty, that they're willing to work with them because we just don't know what's going to happen. So can you tell us some ways that faculty have been flexible with students so that learning is enhanced and maybe perhaps their stress reduced?
As an example, some people don't like the online reading or having to click on, 50,000 links and have these different tabs open. They also have it where a lot of the text of the material is just on this, ground page where you can just read everything in this one space instead of having to go into different tabs always and getting lost and being in that space, but giving the freedom of not necessarily having to dig deep for the resources. You can have it in one collective space. I think that's really good, just kind of having the flexibility there.
Yeah, we saw others. I was going to say there's another suggestion in the chat too. There can be a best by date for full points and then maybe like a gradient. So that's a great example. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, go ahead, Dawn.
No, I was just going to say, when I think of academic freedom, I think of both faculty members and students being able to engage in intellectual debate without fearing that they will be retaliated against, right? This idea that we can, have an open forum discussion and we can remain true to ourselves, our philosophies, our intellectual commitments, and feel that it is still adding to the educational system and it is still serving the public good as students and as faculty members. I think a lot of times we walk on eggshells with what we say and what we do because we're afraid of, that it might be the wrong response or the wrong answer. And people aren't going to understand it or respect it, or they're not going to see it from my point of view. But having that trust that if I say something that is outside of the norm, still respectful, of course, but outside of the norm, that I'm not going to fail my course, or I'm not going to, as a faculty member, be reported to the dean as being inappropriate in a sense. It does not mean that a faculty member can harass or threaten or intimidate or ridicule a student. I'm not saying that in any regard. And it also doesn't mean that students get to manipulate and master the idea that if you say something that is against what I believe or my values, then I'm going to report you to the university. It just means being able to respect each other's perspective and talk about it in a large sense of, okay, well, let's address that. Let's see, how does that contribute or not contribute to the greater good of, the people or the world, or whatever topic it is that you're discussing in class, whatever your field of study is. I think it's just very important that we, not have to walk on eggshells when it comes to being free in the classroom to have conversation and to really dig deep into those topics that we're learning. It's very important that we, with the world being so different and changing all the time, it's very important that we can dig a lot deeper than we have been able to before. And it's like, I never thought about that. Even though I don't agree, I've just never thought about that perspective. So I think that that's important when we talk about academic freedom and academic flexibility, that we can each speak and not feel like my job is on the line as a faculty member or my status as a student is on the line as a student. So it's just very important.
Another coach suggested a way to give some flexibility is give students access to the class if you can, if it's within your power. Give them access maybe a week before or as early as possible. Publish that course before the actual class starts. So students have the opportunity to plan their term, their semester. I know I work with international students who really appreciate that time. If they can get access to textbooks maybe a little early, just because if English is not their first language, they like that little bit of space and time to become familiar with the text. I think we all know students, with all the things that are happening in the world and with the way things have been kind of a roller coaster, that they are definitely seeking some flexibility. But I do think they also want some consistency. So it's a tight line to walk, having that flexibility and still being consistent to something they can predict. I think we're gonna wrap up here. I know there's some comments I haven't really been able to keep up with in the chat. We'll go to the last slide here. We've got some takeaway resources, and then if we want to have some questions and answers, we can open it up for that. And thank you both for sharing your experiences so much.
Yes, thanks to all three of you for sharing, leading the discussion and sharing, your takeaways and your thoughts there. We can leave a minute or two if anybody wants to come off mute. If you have any questions for the three of them, go right ahead. Or if there's a question in chat, you can put that in there also. We'll give that maybe a 30 seconds or a minute. Maybe you guys were so thorough, there might not be any questions, right? And Cheryl, do you mind kind of going to I think it's maybe the next slide. Awesome, perfect. Awesome. Okay. Well, I don't think there's gonna be any questions, but I want to thank everybody for being here today. And again, thank the three of you for kind of leading the discussion. You can see the slide here. We have a webinar coming up on March 30th. It is 5 tips for successful faculty partnerships. This will be led by Carrie O'Donnell, our CEO and founder of O'Donnell Learn, and Tammy Lockett. She is our Director of Learning Design Innovation, and they're going to lead a discussion on forming successful learning partnerships with designers and faculty. I'm hoping all of you can join. Please share with your faculty and friends so we can have a nice large audience there. And the PowerPoint and resources today, we will also send out for follow-up. But thanks again and enjoy the rest of your week.